Oops, looks like somebody left some garbage lying around. Let me just get this out of the way. Mapping doesn't need to slow down your game, and in fact, it shouldn't. First, before I show you how to do that, establish convention. We've got some thick dungeon walls here that are 10 foot thick at least, and we've got some shoji style, those little Japanese paper walls. In reality, these would be about 2-3 feet thick each at a 10-foot dungeon scale. Thick is easier to call. Shoji you're going to see in more old school published modules and has less negative space, so it's personal preference, but I would be able to familiarize yourself with shoji if you're ever going to use published modules. I'm going to talk about hallways first and how we're going to establish our convention with our mapper. See, I've got this dungeon up here, but I've got an issue. How am I going to call this? Am I going to call this 30 foot east turns north 30 foot east? The problem is, if I say 30 foot east and my mapper does this and draws a 30 foot hallway to the east, and then I say turns north, well, now we've got a hallway that's 40 feet in total, and that's not what I want. So to completely eliminate ambiguity, I like to pretend that my mapper is using a pin, which he shouldn't be, but I like to pretend, and call things piece by piece. So first problem that we're going to solve is I'm just going to say hallway 20 feet to the east. So 20 foot east hallway. And now I've got to call the turn. So I'm just going to say turn north. Now what is my mapper going to draw? When I say turn north, he's got a couple of options, right? Let's say we've already got our hallway here that's been going to the east, and then I say turn north. He could do this, right, and draw this sort of elbow right here. But he's going to run into a problem if we're doing a shoji-style dungeon, right? So therefore, instead of doing it like that, I'd like to just have him draw this L right here, this backwards L, for a turn north. Just two walls, right? And that's going to keep it kosher for if we have this this shoji style down here. So to map this top one, what I would do is if they were starting from this room like this, right? I'd say 20-foot hallway to the east. My mapper draws a 20-foot hallway. I say turn north. He just does these two walls. Now if I do have the thick style dungeon, then I'm going to say, okay, 10 foot north, turn east, 20-foot hallway. Comes to an end. And then if I have the shoji style dungeon, 20 foot east, turn north, turn east, 20 foot east. And there you go. And as you can see, we've also done that with a branch, as well as a cross and a T. So real quick, mapping this top one, I've got hallway 20 foot to the east, branch south, and with branching south, I've got a wall and a dot just in case these branches go parallel to themselves, which you'll see in the shoji style. But if I don't have the shoji style, I can say south runs 10 foot and ends, east runs 20 feet in this case, right? So we've got east runs 20 feet, right? Shoji style, we've got the hallway that runs 20 foot to the east, and then there's a branch south, so put a wall and then a dot. Southern branch runs south 10 feet. Eastern branch turns south and runs 20 feet. And that's how we've got those parallel hallways, and you notice that if we tried to map with the thick style, that wouldn't play nicely with our shoji dungeons. Crosses, we're going to put two dots, again, because parallel hallways are going to screw us up if we try to put this little cruciform junction here. Just as an example real quick, for this bit of mapping here, we'll have a hallway that runs 10 foot to the east and ends in a cross, and so my mapper would then put two dots, and I'd say north branch is 10 feet and ends, east branch is 20 feet and ends, south branch runs 10 foot south, turns east, runs 10 foot east, and terminates. And there we go, we've got that. And then for our shoji style dungeon, just so that you can get familiar with the conventions, we've got a hallway that runs 10 foot east, ends in a cross, north 10 foot, east runs 20 feet, and ends. South branch turns east, runs for 10 feet, and ends. And now we've got this frustrating cruciform dungeon that we can map out pretty easily with very little ambiguity. And then a T is kind of like a branch, but we're approaching it from a different side. And again, what you have to be careful of is instead of drawing this little Tetris piece, right, that's going to run into problems if it doubles back on itself, which you're not going to see very often, but again, in certain shoji dungeons, that can happen. So mapping this top one, right, we start in our room, we're coming out 10 foot to the east, and dungeon ends in a T, and so I want my mapper to put that back wall there. Runs south for 10 feet, runs north for 10 feet, turns east, runs east for another 10 feet and terminates. And then for this really frustrating one down here, we'll have east 10 feet, ends in a cross. The south part of the cross turns west, and then it turns south and runs for 10 feet and ends. The north turns west, runs for 20 feet and ends. And so you see when we've got that parallel thing that runs back on itself, we're going to have to use this convention rather than this convention. So familiarize yourself with this. For the turn, we just want to put in those extra 2 walls. For the branch, we want to just use the back wall and then a dot. For the cross, we want to use 2 dots, and for the T, we just want to put that back wall. And that should keep our hallways fairly simple, fairly nice. And of course, as you create more complicated dungeons, you'll have hallways that are 20 foot wide or run in a 45-degree angle, etc., etc. But keep things easy on yourself for your first few adventures. As your mapper gets used to mapping and you get used to calling, you can make the maps a little more difficult, and that's fun as well. All right, going into rooms. The thing that I want to establish with rooms right off the bat is the overall dimensions of the room. Now, the problem here that we run into in a lot of games is I can say, all right, you open up the door, they're coming from a hallway, you open up a door and you're in a 30 by 30 room. Okay, but my mapper doesn't know if they're in a 30 by 30 room like this, or like this, or like this, right? Creates ambiguity, right? Where are they entering in? So if you're designing your own dungeon, maybe to keep things simple, you always have them enter in the middle of the room and you keep your square rooms, whatever. I mean, for your first ever dungeon, that's totally appropriate. But as we get a little more complicated here, let's talk about, we're coming in here, right, into this 30 by 20 room. And so what I would do is I would say, all right, you enter the room, there's 10 foot of wall to the south, and the room is 30 by 20. And I always call the dimensions west to east and south to north, or east-west, north-south, doesn't really matter. But I do how wide it is and how tall it is, and not the opposite. Just keep it the same, that way your mapper knows, right? So if we have this dungeon over here, right, or this dungeon room over here, entering from the hallway, what I would tell my mapper is, okay, to the north you have 20 foot of wall, to the south you have 30 foot of wall. And this room overall is 40 foot wide, 40 foot east-west, or 40 foot west-east, whatever you want to say, and then 60 foot north-south. And then that gives us this wall, or this room, which is unambiguous and easy to map. There are going to be exits in your rooms as well. Now, to call those quickly and to keep your mapper moving at an even clip, once we've got our room mapped out, it should be pretty simple to call these dungeon doors. And the convention that I use is that you are always counting from south to north and from west to east. It's pretty easy to remember because we read left to right, and south to north, north to south doesn't really matter. I always do south to north. So I would say, all right, on the north, and this is where they entered, so on the north wall there's a door in the middle. You can say that if the room is small enough, right? On the east wall we've got doors at 20 and 40, right? So 10, 20, 30, 40, right? So this first wall here is going to be 10 foot. It's not going to be 0 or anything like that. And on the west wall, you got a door at 10, and then the door you came in at 40. On the south wall, you've got doors at 20 and 30, right? 20, 30. Again, counting south to north, west to east. Just establish that convention with your mapper and stick to it. It's really personal preference beyond that. Now, something tricky we get into is chambers rather than rooms. Rooms have doors, chambers don't. And these can be tougher to map. I'd say avoid chambers for your first dungeon, but like I said, a lot of published adventures use them, and cave systems are going to be mostly chambers. Now here we have to abandon our convention of our mapper using a pen, because it is just going to be way easier for us to give the overall dimensions of the room first and say, all right, you come into the room, to the south there's 30 feet of wall, so here we go, coming into the room, to the south 30 feet of wall, and this room is 30 foot by 40 foot. Okay, so 30 foot by 40 foot. And this is a chamber, so we have exits, and we'll call them exits rather than doors. Exit in the middle of the north wall, and an exit in the southeast. It's a 20 foot, da-da-da-da-da. These, of course, like I said, they get a little more complicated. And so your mapper will have to erase, if I said, all right, there's a 20-foot exit in the southeast corner of the room running 45 degrees southeast. You see how this quickly, we're shaking up the conventions a little bit, and it's going to be a little harder to map. There might be a little more ambiguity, but that's the point of maps that are a little more difficult. There is the possibility that they get screwed up, and that's part of the challenge. And then, like I said, the mapper is going to have to erase these. So chambers and caves are harder to map, and that's sort of by design. Then we have some rooms that are going to have odd shapes. Now, this is personal preference, and of course, for your first ever dungeon map, I would recommend not using rooms with odd shapes, but it's a lot of published adventures with them like that. So it's going to be up to you whether you want to give these room dimensions by adding or by cutting, and it's just going to be whatever's easiest for you. So if I said, all right, you enter the room, 10 foot of hall to the north, 10 foot of hall, or 10 foot of wall to the north and south, 30 by 30 room, and then in the northeast corner of the room, you're going to add a 20 by 30 room 10 foot up from the southeast corner. And so that has them add this onto here. And again, they're going to have to erase. That's fine. The pen using mapper is just a convention I use to explain the concept of giving good hallway instructions. Your mapper should not actually be using a pen unless he's an absolute psychopath. And then with cutting dungeons, or cutting rooms, we've got the overall dimensions of the room, which are, 50 by 50. So you come into the middle of the wall, you got 20 foot north and south, and 50 by 50 room, or you can say 50 square. And then I'd say cut 30 by 20 from the northeast corner, and cut 20 by 10 from the southeast corner. And then you've got this wonky room shape. Again, they're going to have to erase. All right. Finishing up, we're going to talk about ways to make mapping matter. Now, the first thing I want to go over is that with your maps, you can actually use your maps to signify where secret rooms and traps are. And you can use that by having accurate maps reveal things using symmetry, rhythm, negative space, or motif. So for symmetry, if we look at this top left room here, it's got these rooms that are branching off, these little 10 foot by 10 foot rooms branching off in each corner. Now you notice the southwest corner is a secret door. So on my mapper's map, he's going to notice, wait, we've got northwest, northeast, southeast, nothing here. Maybe he wants to search that wall, and it reveals this little secret room with a lot of treasure in it. So symmetry is very important for that. Rhythm as well. We've got this twisting sort of intestinal hallway. And notice at these junctions we've got pit traps. So as my players are moving through this hallway and they find the trap here and they find the trap here, well, wait a minute, as they're coming through here, they're probably going to be pretty wise to the fact that there might be a trap here. So rhythm can also be good for revealing traps, revealing hidden rooms, and really they're two sides of the same coin. You can use these principles to reveal traps or rooms as you like. Negative space, if I've got this really tight shoji style dungeon and everything's mapped out, but at the very end of mapping it all, they notice there's this little 10-foot by 10-foot area that's unaccounted for. That might tip them off that there's a little hidden chamber in here, a little hidden room that I can put treasure in. And motif, we've got, whenever we come across these same shapes, this little like, I don't know, it's almost like an Atari shape. At the south tip, we've always got something interesting. So sometimes we have a door or stairs down, and we might run into a trap or a secret door here. So whenever my players run into this motif, and this could be oriented to the south or the east, it doesn't really matter, they get hip to the fact that, wait a minute, there's usually something at the tip of this little motif, so I'm going to check that out thoroughly. I'm going to be more careful about it. There's also just tell them, which means that they can roll on the rumor table in town and stuff like that and hear about traps and secret rooms. They can get scraps of map as a reward. These are great, especially when you have complicated rooms or complicated hallways. I've had players literally weep with joy after finding scraps of map as treasure in the dungeon, because it makes it so much easier for them, or reveals where there's important stuff. They can also get info as a reward, or extract info out of the denizens of the dungeon. Factions, as factions like them more, they might tell them, hey, there's a secret tunnel here, there, wherever. And of course, the age-old player motivator, XP and treasure. If your players map pretty correctly, you can have them sell the map or allow the map to be copied by the local cartographers guild and get treasure as a reward. And you can offer your mapper some bonus experience. I like to do 10% bonus experience for the mapper, but that depends on how generous you are, and maybe if they make the map 100% accurate, you give them a little bonus on top of that. But I hope you have fun with that. Maps are a ton of fun. Mapping is a ton of fun. Making your players map is, of course, the essence of old school D&D, and I hope you have a great day. Go ahead and tell me your favorite dungeon mapping tricks and stuff like that. And I do read all the comments, and I appreciate them very much. Thank you guys so much. I really like doing these videos, and I hope to do some more. Thank you.